I mentioned when I was referring to this working definition, SSE economic units include cooperatives, mutual benefit societies, associations, foundations, social enterprises, self-help groups, and collective, among others. In many countries, the most prominent form, the one that we are most familiar with, is cooperatives. They are well established with relatively long history in most of our countries, with sectoral diversity, legislation, support institutions from the governmental side, but also co-op movement side, and to some extent also statistics. Traditionally, we see them in agriculture or finance or housing and retail, but increasingly we see new types of cooperatives. For instance, worker cooperatives are on the rise, social cooperatives, and multi-stakeholder cooperatives, which bring workers and maybe users and even sometimes local government or public authorities. And they are also emerging in new sectors, for instance, with youth engaging in them in technology, renewable energy, working with refugees, and in providing health and care services. There are, of course, very big cooperatives of agriculture, finance, housing, and you may, even though they may be owned by producers, users, people may ask, how solidaristic are they? And when they... I can hear translator. I'm sorry, I'm hearing translator. Can I continue? When SSE units like these kind of co-ops become too big, there is a risk that they lose touch with their members. And one way to assure that they stay connected to the local community and demonstrate solidarity is through ongoing support to the growth of new co-ops and SSE units in their communities, for instance, in the informal economy and among disadvantaged youth and women. This is also aligned with the Cooperative Principle 6 of the 7 Cooperative Principles, which is on cooperation among cooperatives. For among home-based workers, and this is based on a study that was done by WIGO and ILO a couple of years back, worker and producer cooperatives are among the most common, but they can also use, of course, producer companies, which fall under SSE units and associations. And they may also adopt user cooperatives like, financial cooperatives or housing cooperatives that provide housing services. I mentioned worker cooperatives. Not all countries have worker cooperatives and legislation. In fact, many recent SSE policies around the world are adopting. I'm sorry, I hear the translation again. One popular form of worker ownership is when workers lose their jobs due to enterprise failures during crisis times and the subsequent transition. In such cases, workers and firms with economic potential can buy out and transform the firms into worker-owned businesses. Why am I mentioning this? Because there are many examples of this happening in the garment industry where, there is bankruptcy and then workers taking over, of course, with support from financial support and management support, etc., but taking over to run these as worker-owned enterprises. There are growing examples of this in Brazil, Argentina, Spain, Italy, where they have the law, so it makes it easier for such worker-owned initiatives to flourish. In my own country, in Turkey, there are examples, but there is no law, so there's a lot of actually struggle. And they have been, managing with international solidarity, etc. There is also the notion of retiring owners, of aging owners of companies, and where there is no clear plan for future. So in such cases, again, worker ownership through SSE, worker co-ops are opted for, and trade unions have been really supportive of these kind of worker buyouts around the world, including like in Quebec, in Canada. In recent years, there is a growth in social cooperatives. I want to briefly also mention that these are involved in care services for children, elderly, people with disabilities, or in job placement of people, vulnerable populations. They are, in many cases, multi-stakeholder in nature, as I was mentioning a little while before, with local government, worker, and beneficiaries as members. And this may be a model worth exploring for HomeNet International, for instance, in addressing care needs of members. Although we have done some analyses on this from the ILO, I'm happy to share with you, and extensive engagement of local government is often needed for sustainability. Another form that we see is mutual societies under SSC, and these are established primarily to organize insurance coverage through mutual assistance. We see, for instance, in Rwanda, Senegal, Ghana, mutual health insurance systems providing extensive community-based health insurance in rural and informal economies. In France and Belgium, mutual insurance schemes have been gaining strength among the self-employed, like platform economy workers, delivery workers, taxi drivers, etc. Some may criticize these mutual societies as being too small and fragmented, but then when they congregate under unions and federations of their own, they can actually create economies of scale and become negotiating force for their members, like with the national social security systems. They are quite widespread in West Africa and North Africa, in Francophone countries, not so much around the globe. Associations and voluntary organizations also fall under SSC economic units, provided that they are allowed under law to perform economic activities, because in some countries associations are not allowed to do that. In such cases, people may choose to set up another form allowing them to take economic activities. For instance, foundations. Foundations, of course, you are familiar with, but they exist in many of our countries. But then in both of these instances, democratic ownership and control is not necessitated in the law. And so this form may lose its way, even if the founders and members and managers are committed. In time, this commitment, if it is not enforceable, may actually legally obligated, it may disappear. So there's that kind of risk there. Social enterprise is a newer form, and we are hearing it, around the world. They are units for which social and societal objectives of common good is the reason for their commercial activity, and they are often used. Social enterprise and social innovation is used together. So not all social enterprises, as you can tell from this definition. Again, there's not a standard international definition. There's a lot of variance in those in countries around the world, but not all of them fall under SSE. Those where the organization or the ownership system reflects the mission, using democratic or participatory principles or focusing on social justice, fall under SSE, but those that are more individualistic are not under SSE. The scope and nature of SSE units changes from country to country and region to region. There are some very traditional forms in many of our countries. In fact, as we were starting this session, I put in the chat a brief from Indonesia, both in Bahasa and in English, on SSE in Indonesia. And there are many, in fact, traditional notions of solidarity that exist without necessarily registering, but they are part of, SSE. And then there are those, of course, that are more, those that are regulated and registered. I mentioned in Francophone Africa, we see more like mutuals. In Anglophone countries, we come across more the social enterprises as well as cooperatives. SSE as an umbrella term is well recognized in continental Europe, in the Mediterranean basin, in Francophone countries, and in Latin America, but it's in earlier stages of development in the Asia-Pacific region.